I had always dreamed of being my own boss, but for a long time, that dream felt like a distant fantasy. Growing up, my family struggled with money. My dad worked multiple jobs, but no matter how hard he worked, it always seemed like there was never enough. I promised myself that I would find a way to change that, to break the cycle. But it wasn't easy. After high school, I went to a local community college. I didn't have a clear career path, but I knew I needed a degree for stability. I majored in business because it felt like the safest choice. Everyone around me was talking about finding stable, high-paying jobs after graduation. I went through the motions, studying and attending class, all while working part-time at a retail job just to make ends meet. My first real taste of entrepreneurship came when I was 22. I had just graduated with my associate's degree, and I had been working at a local coffee shop. I had a manager at the time who ran the place like a dictator. He micromanaged everything and made sure to take all the credit. I remember feeling frustrated every single day, watching him get rewarded while the rest of us did all the hard work. One day, after a particularly tense shift, I realized something. I could do this. I could open my own cafe. I had the skills, the ideas, and, most importantly, the drive. I spent the next few months sketching out a business plan, researching what I would need, and figuring out how to get the funding. At first, the idea felt like an impossible dream, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the only thing standing between me and success was the willingness to try. I didn't have any investors or rich relatives to back me up, so I took out a small loan and used what little savings I had to get started. I found a small location in a busy downtown area, and after months of hard work, I opened a coffee shop. The first few weeks were brutal. I had 0 customers at first. I remember sitting behind the counter, staring at the empty tables, feeling completely defeated. But I didn't give up. I continued promoting my cafe on social media, offering discounts, and even handing out free coffee to people passing by. Slowly but surely, word of mouth started to spread. A few months in, my little cafe was starting to pick up. I had regular customers, and business was steady. But I had an unsettling feeling in the back of my mind. I was stuck. I wasn't growing as quickly as I had imagined. I wanted more, but I wasn't sure how to get it. I was spending all my time working at the cafe, barely keeping my head above water. That's when I realized I needed to make some changes. I began focusing on improving the customer experience. I introduced a loyalty program and partnered with local businesses to cross-promote. I also started offering special events like open mic nights, poetry readings, and art shows. The cafe became a local hotspot, and before long, people were lining up to get in. The best part? I wasn't just selling coffee anymore. I was selling an experience. As the business continued to grow, I knew it was time to think bigger. I started exploring the possibility of franchising my cafe. The idea terrified me. What if it failed? What if I wasn't cut out for it? But then I thought about how far I had come and how many obstacles I had already overcome. I couldn't back down now. I spent the next year building a franchise model and negotiating with potential investors. It wasn't easy. There were times when I thought it was all going to fall apart. But eventually, I secured the necessary funding to open my first franchise location. I was both excited and terrified at the same time. Opening the franchise was a whole new ballgame. I had to learn how to manage multiple locations, deal with larger teams, and handle corporate logistics. There were plenty of growing pains, but I was determined to make it work. Every challenge was an opportunity to learn and improve. Slowly but surely, the brand started to gain traction. By the time I opened my 4th location, my brand had become a recognizable name in the local coffee scene. People were actively seeking out my cafes, and I was starting to see my vision take shape. My personal life had taken a hit, though. I was working all the time, rarely seeing my family or friends. I had no work-life balance, and I was on the verge of burnout. But I couldn't stop. I had too much invested. Then one day, my older brother, who had always been supportive of my business, came to visit me at the cafe. He sat me down and told me, "You need to take a break. If you keep working yourself into the ground, you'll lose everything you've built." At first, I was defensive. I didn't want to hear it. But he was right. I was running myself into the ground. I decided to take his advice. I hired a manager to take over the day-to-day operations of the cafe while I focused on the bigger picture. It wasn't easy to relinquish control, but I had to trust my team. The first few months were rocky, but eventually, I found a good rhythm. I was able to focus on expanding the business, planning for the future, and most importantly, spending more time with my family. Years passed, and my brand expanded beyond my wildest dreams. By the time I was 30, I had 10 cafe locations, and I was earning more than I ever thought possible. But my success didn't come without its sacrifices. There were days when I doubted myself, times when I wondered if I was making the right choices. Looking back now, I realize that entrepreneurship isn't a linear journey. It's filled with ups and downs, and there will always be obstacles. The key is to keep moving forward, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. If I had given up when things got tough, I wouldn't be where I am today. I would have been just another person with a broken dream. It's been a long road, but I've learned that perseverance, adaptability, and resilience are the keys to success. I didn't have a blueprint for success, but I was willing to learn from my mistakes, adjust my strategies, and keep pushing forward. Today, I'm proud to say that my cafe brand is thriving, and I've built a company that I can be proud of. More importantly, I've built a life that I never thought was possible. There are still days when I wonder what comes next, but for now, I'm content. The dream I once thought was impossible is now my reality. And I've learned that anything is possible when you believe in yourself and never give up. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I've been an entrepreneur for over a decade now, and while I've learned a lot about building businesses, it's my story of starting with nothing and growing into something that I think is worth sharing. This is not a tale about overnight success or a lucky break, but more of a gritty, messy journey that took a lot of grit, pain, and perseverance. It all started when I was 22. I had just graduated college with a degree in marketing, but the job market was rough. I had applied to dozens of places, sent out my resume everywhere, but the world seemed uninterested in my fresh degree and eager attitude. I was still living at home with my parents, scraping by with a few odd jobs to make ends meet. I wasn't broke, but I wasn't exactly swimming in cash either. I had always been drawn to the idea of owning my own business, but at that point, I had no idea what kind of business I could start. I knew I didn't want to just work a 9 to 5, but the thought of taking a leap into entrepreneurship terrified me. I didn't have any rich relatives, no investors, and no previous experience running a business. I was, in essence, a nobody in the world of business. Then one day, I had a conversation with an old friend from college who had been working in the tech field. He was explaining how much money he was making creating apps and software. It sounded simple enough. He designed some software, sold it, and people bought it. The thing that really stuck with me was how little overhead he had. He wasn't dealing with inventory or office space. He just needed his computer and a good idea. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about it, running through different ideas in my head. What kind of software could I create? What would people actually want to buy? I didn't know the first thing about coding, but I knew enough about marketing to understand that there was a market for pretty much anything if it was done right. So, I did what any broke college graduate would do. I started Googling. I dove deep into learning about the tech world, read articles, watched tutorials, and enrolled in online coding courses. I wasn't an expert by any means, but I figured that I could at least get a basic understanding of how to communicate with developers. This would be crucial if I ever wanted to build something myself or even outsource development. A few months later, after hours of learning the basics of coding, I finally came up with an idea. It was simple, a time-tracking app for freelancers. I had noticed that freelancers often complained about how difficult it was to keep track of their hours, manage projects, and bill clients accurately. It seemed like there was a gap in the market, and I was determined to fill it. I didn't have the funds to hire a developer, so I reached out to a freelance developer I had found on a platform called Upwork. His hourly rate wasn't cheap, but it was affordable enough that I could get some initial work done. We agreed on the scope of the project, and I started putting together a plan. While the developer worked on the app, I focused on building the marketing side of things. I created a website, started reaching out to potential customers, and even created a blog to build awareness around the idea. I wasn't expecting massive success right away, but I knew that if I could get a few people interested in the app, I'd have a solid foundation to build on. The first few months were brutal. The developer and I had a lot of miscommunications, and there were several times when I thought the whole thing was going to fall apart. The app wasn't perfect, and I didn't have the expertise to know how to make it better. But I stuck with it. I learned from my mistakes, asked questions, and slowly began to understand the complexities of development. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the app was finished. I launched it, and to my surprise, people started using it. Not hundreds, but dozens. Then it grew to hundreds. I was making sales, and people were leaving positive reviews. But I wasn't about to get complacent. I knew I had to keep pushing forward. I spent the next year working tirelessly to improve the app. I added new features, tweaked the design, and listened to customer feedback. I even started working on a mobile version of the app. There were moments when I felt like giving up, when the workload was overwhelming, but I always reminded myself why I started in the first place. I wanted more than just a job. I wanted a business. I wanted freedom. At some point, the app started to generate more money than I ever thought possible. I was still working from my parents' house, but now I could afford my own apartment, and I was slowly reinvesting the profits into growing the business. I eventually hired a small team to help with development, customer support, and marketing. The business began to run more smoothly, but the grind never stopped. By the time I was 30, the app was generating six figures in revenue annually. I had learned so much, not just about software development, but also about managing people, handling finances, and navigating the ups and downs of business ownership. There were times when things went wrong, like when a major bug in the software caused an outage for a few days, or when we had cash flow problems during a slow month. But each setback taught me something new. Looking back, it feels surreal. At the beginning, I didn't even know if the idea would work. I wasn't sure if I could even build a product that people would buy. But now, I have a business that I'm proud of. It's not the biggest in the world, but it's mine, and it's still growing. The most important lesson I've learned throughout this journey is that success isn't about having the perfect plan or making the right moves from the get-go. It's about persistence. It's about pushing through when things don't go according to plan and finding ways to adapt. Most importantly, it's about the willingness to learn and fail, and then get back up and try again. So, if you're reading this and you're sitting there wondering if it's worth it, if you should take the leap, or if you have what it takes, just know this. You don't have to have all the answers from the start. You just need to start, and then keep going, no matter how hard it gets. If I can do it, so can you. I had always known I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Growing up, I had a fascination with businesses, whether it was a local coffee shop or the giant tech companies that were starting to dominate the world. I would spend hours reading articles, watching documentaries, and even reading business books. But like many others, I was stuck in the typical cycle of working a 9-to-5 job, paying bills, and dreaming of more. It wasn't until I hit rock bottom that I finally took the leap to start my own business. It all started when I was 28. I had been working at a mid-level marketing position for a large corporation for about 3 years. The pay was decent, and the benefits were good, but I felt unfulfilled. I spent most of my days staring at a screen, typing out reports, and attending meetings that seemed to lead nowhere. I knew I had more to offer, but I wasn't sure how to break free. I wanted something that would challenge me, something that would let me grow, not just in my career but in my life. The tipping point came when I was laid off. It was unexpected, just a regular Monday morning when I received an email telling me my position was no longer necessary. I was blindsided, of course. It was the kind of thing that happens to other people, not to you. But after the initial shock wore off, I realized that this might be the universe's way of giving me a push. I had been waiting for the perfect moment to start my business, but this moment wasn't going to wait for me. I had no more excuses. I started by asking myself, what do I truly love doing? What could I spend every day working on without feeling burned out? And the answer came to me quickly. I loved food. Not just eating it, though, of course. I loved that too, but everything about the food industry. I loved the creativity involved, the satisfaction of cooking a perfect meal, and the joy that food can bring to people. After some soul-searching and talking it over with my closest friends and family, I decided to start a food delivery business. At the time, food delivery services like Uber Eats and DoorDash were becoming increasingly popular, but there was still room in the market for a more personalized, niche service. I wasn't interested in competing with the giants, but I wanted to carve out my own space. I had no experience in food delivery, and I certainly didn't have the capital to hire a team or buy a fleet of cars. But I was determined. I sold my car to fund the business. I knew that without a car, I'd have to rely on public transportation or walking to make deliveries, but I was willing to do whatever it took. The first few months were brutal. I was working 18-hour days, juggling deliveries with the logistics of managing a business, and learning everything on the fly. The hardest part wasn't the physical work, though. It was the constant fear of failure. Every time I received an order, I wondered if this would be the one where everything fell apart. Would the food get delivered late? Would the customer be unhappy? Would they leave a bad review? And what if I couldn't make enough money to keep the business going? Every day, I had to fight that voice in my head that told me to quit. But over time, I started to see progress. I grew my customer base through word of mouth. People loved the personal touch I offered. I wasn't just a faceless delivery service. I was someone they could trust, someone who genuinely cared about their experience. I would often go above and beyond, delivering special requests, offering personalized notes with their orders, and even calling customers to make sure everything was perfect. It wasn't just about delivering food. It was about delivering an experience. Within the first year, the business began to grow faster than I had expected. I hired a couple of drivers to help with deliveries, and I was able to invest in a small kitchen space. We started offering a wider variety of meals, including healthy options and meal prep services. We also started to specialize in catering small events, birthday parties, corporate meetings, and even weddings. The niche service I had envisioned was slowly taking shape, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. By the second year, I was able to hire a full team, including chefs, a marketing manager, and even a logistics coordinator. We expanded our delivery radius, added more vehicles, and upgraded our website. I knew I was building something real, but it still felt like a constant battle. There were so many unexpected challenges: suppliers who ran out of stock, drivers who got sick, and the never-ending changes in the food industry. But I wasn't just building a business anymore. I was building a brand. I focused on creating a strong social media presence, sharing behind-the-scenes content, customer stories, and of course, mouth-watering photos of our meals. Slowly but surely, people started recognizing the brand. We were no longer just a small food delivery service. We had become a staple in the community. Our growth was steady, and I started to feel like I was finally in control. By the third year, we had reached a point where we were making a profit. Not just a small one, but a sustainable, significant profit. My team and I celebrated the milestone, but I also knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much more to do. We expanded into new cities, started offering franchising opportunities, and even developed a mobile app for easier ordering. But as the business grew, I had to learn a crucial lesson. I couldn't do it all myself. Delegating became one of the hardest but most necessary things I had to do. I had to trust my team to handle day-to-day operations while I focused on scaling the business. It wasn't easy, and there were growing pains along the way, but I learned that leadership isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about inspiring and empowering others to help you achieve your vision. Fast forward to today, and my food delivery company is one of the top-rated services in the region. We've expanded internationally, and I'm now able to take vacations without worrying about the business crumbling. It hasn't been easy, and there have been countless sleepless nights, but I look back on my journey and feel incredibly proud of how far I've come. If you had told me 5 years ago that I'd be running a multi-million-dollar business, I would have laughed. But now, I realize that the key to success wasn't just about having a great idea. It was about believing in myself when everyone else doubted me, and sticking with it even when the odds were stacked against me. If you're reading this and wondering if you should take the leap, my advice is simple: do it. The road will be hard, the failures will be frequent, and the sacrifices will be many, but the reward is worth it. Don't wait for the perfect moment, create it. It was the summer of 2015, and I was living in a small apartment in downtown Chicago. I was 24 years old, broke, and had just been laid off from my first real job. After years of working at various internships and odd jobs, I thought this was supposed to be the moment where I'd finally make it. Instead, I was back at square one with nothing but a crumpled resume and a ton of student debt. If I'm being honest, I felt like a failure. At the time, I had a side hustle where I was selling custom t-shirts on Etsy. It was nothing special, just a hobby I thought could bring in a few bucks. I had learned some basic design skills and figured, why not try and sell them? But to my surprise, I started getting some traction. It was slow at first. A shirt here, a mug there. But then one day, I woke up to an order for 50 shirts. A corporate order. I nearly fell out of bed when I saw the notification. A company was looking to create custom shirts for their team, and they wanted to work with me. I couldn't believe it. I didn't have the materials to even make 50 shirts, let alone fulfill the order within the timeline they wanted. But I decided to give it a shot. I reached out to a local printing company and told them about the order. After some negotiations, I had a deal. They would handle the printing, and I would handle everything else: the design, the packaging, the customer service. This was my first real opportunity, and I wasn't going to let it slip through my fingers. I worked day and night to make sure everything was perfect, from the designs to the packaging. I didn't have much money, but I borrowed some from my parents to cover the costs up front. The deal went through, and the client was happy. They even gave me a 5-star review, which meant everything at the time. I was on a high for the next few weeks. My Etsy shop suddenly started getting more orders, and I realized I could actually make a living off this. So, I doubled down. I started creating new designs, reached out to other businesses for custom orders, and learned everything I could about the printing industry. I was living off ramen noodles and energy drinks, working from dawn until midnight, but I didn't care. I was building something. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know anything about SEO, marketing, or branding. I was just hustling. But slowly, I started to understand the basics. I figured out how to optimize my Etsy store, and I learned how to use social media to market my designs. I even started collaborating with influencers, sending free shirts in exchange for shoutouts. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. My orders kept growing, and I started to build a small following. Around a year into the business, I hit a roadblock. I had outgrown the small apartment I was living in, and I couldn't keep up with the growing demand. My living room was filled with boxes of shirts, my kitchen was a packing station, and my bedroom was a storage closet. I knew I had to make a decision. Either I'd scale the business or let it go. I made the choice to scale. I took the risk and rented a small office space in the suburbs. I hired 2 employees to help with packing and customer service. It was a big jump, but I had a gut feeling that this was my chance to take things to the next level. I took out a small loan to cover the upfront costs of the office space and equipment. The first few months were tough. There were mistakes, hiccups, and a lot of stress. But slowly, I learned how to manage the business better. I got better at negotiating with suppliers, I refined my marketing strategies, and I invested in improving the quality of my products. The business started growing exponentially. By the end of 2018, my company had grown into something I never could have imagined. We were selling thousands of custom shirts every month. I hired a full-time marketing team, a production manager, and a couple of designers. I had even hired a fulfillment center to handle the logistics, which freed up my time to focus on growth and expansion. Looking back, I realized that the hardest part of my journey wasn't the sleepless nights or the financial struggles. It was dealing with self-doubt. There were so many moments when I thought I wasn't cut out for entrepreneurship. I was constantly comparing myself to other, more established businesses and felt like I was always behind. But I kept pushing through because I had no other choice. The fear of failure was too strong. I wasn't going to go back to being broke. Now, in 2025, my business is worth millions. We've expanded to include a wide range of products beyond t-shirts, hats, hoodies, mugs, and even custom home decor. We've grown into a fully operational brand with a dedicated team of 50 people. We sell to both individuals and businesses, and we've secured partnerships with large corporations for their employee merchandise. I've even expanded internationally. It's crazy to think how far I've come from those early days of packing shirts in my tiny apartment. The journey has been anything but smooth, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I've learned so much about resilience, problem-solving, and taking risks. There are days when I still feel that same fear I had when I first started. The fear that I'm not doing enough or that I could lose it all in a moment. But I've learned to embrace it. It's part of the process. To anyone reading this who's feeling stuck, or like they're never going to make it, I want you to know that it's okay. I've been there. The road to success isn't linear. You'll have setbacks, you'll make mistakes, and you'll doubt yourself. But if you stay focused, keep working, and trust the process, you'll eventually find your way. Don't be afraid to start small. Don't be afraid to fail. The best things often come from the most unlikely beginnings. Thanks for reading. It all started when I was 22. I had just graduated college, full of optimism and enthusiasm, thinking I was ready to conquer the world. I had a degree in marketing, but as I quickly found out, a degree alone doesn't open doors, it just leads you to more questions. I wasn't sure if I wanted to work for someone else, but my parents kept telling me, get a stable job, and the rest will follow. They had always been traditional, believing that a 9-to-5 job was the only way to succeed. But something inside me was restless. I knew deep down that I wasn't made to sit in an office every day, answering to a boss who might not even understand my vision. So, I started considering entrepreneurship. It sounded glamorous, being your own boss, working when you wanted, having unlimited potential. It felt like the freedom I craved. The idea came to me during a conversation with a friend at a coffee shop. He was talking about the huge potential of the online world, specifically e-commerce. He had started selling niche products online and had made decent money, not enough to quit his job, but enough to take notice. The more we talked, the more I became intrigued by the idea. I had no idea how to run an online business, but the thought of creating something from nothing, of being able to sell directly to people around the world, was exhilarating. So, I spent the next few weeks reading books, listening to podcasts, and watching countless YouTube videos. I dove deep into e-commerce, learned about drop shipping, branding, digital marketing, everything I could. It wasn't easy, though. There were times when I felt overwhelmed, especially when the information seemed contradictory or when my friends and family didn't understand why I wasn't just getting a job. Despite the doubts, I pushed forward. I spent weeks building a website from scratch. It was a lot of trial and error, but eventually, I launched a small online store selling phone accessories. The product wasn't revolutionary, but I figured there was a market for it. I chose a niche I thought would do well. People love customizing their phones, and phone accessories were easy to ship and inexpensive. When the site went live, I was ecstatic. I told everyone I knew. I shared it on social media, sent links to my family, and even handed out flyers at local events. I spent a lot of money on ads, hoping that the products would fly off the shelves. But days turned into weeks, and the sales were dismal. I made 1 or 2 sales here and there, but it wasn't enough to even cover the cost of my ads. I had put in so much effort, but the results didn't match the vision I had. I didn't give up, though. I kept tweaking the website, adjusting the product descriptions, and running different ad campaigns. Nothing seemed to work, but there was something inside me that wouldn't let me quit. I'd already invested so much time and money, and I couldn't bear the thought of failure. I knew I had to learn from my mistakes. A month into my venture, I realized I had been approaching it all wrong. I wasn't targeting the right audience. The phone accessories market was flooded with competition, and standing out was nearly impossible without a unique angle. I had been blindly following what I thought was the right path, but the reality was I needed to pivot. So, I decided to change my entire strategy. Instead of selling generic accessories, I decided to focus on creating personalized phone cases. I partnered with a local artist to design exclusive, one-of-a-kind prints that couldn't be found anywhere else. My thinking was that people loved having unique items, and customization was a big trend. I wasn't just selling a phone case. I was selling an experience, something that made people feel special. I went back to the drawing board. I revamped my website, updated my ads, and refocused my marketing. I also started to engage more with my audience on social media, posting behind-the-scenes content, showing the design process, and encouraging people to share their custom creations. Slowly but surely, I started to see traction. Sales picked up, and customers started leaving positive reviews. I was getting noticed. At the same time, I kept reading and learning more about marketing. I realized that I wasn't just selling products. I was building a brand. I needed to create an emotional connection with my customers, make them feel like they were part of something bigger than just a transaction. I started using email marketing to nurture leads, and I created a customer loyalty program that rewarded repeat buyers. It was these small changes that began to make a significant difference. By the time I turned 24, my business was no longer a side hustle. It had grown to the point where I could comfortably quit my job. I was making enough money that I could focus on the store full-time. But even then, things weren't easy. The growth was slow, and it was easy to feel like I was constantly battling against bigger companies with more resources. But I knew that the personalized angle I was offering was unique enough to keep people interested. One of the most important lessons I learned during this time was the importance of customer service. I always responded to emails quickly, took care of returns with no questions asked, and made sure that customers felt valued. Word of mouth is a powerful thing, and I wanted my customers to not only be satisfied with their purchases, but to feel like they were a part of something special. Fast forward to today, and my online store is thriving. We've expanded into other product lines, and I've built a loyal customer base. I've also hired a small team to help with production and fulfillment, which has allowed me to focus on scaling the business. I no longer have to worry about running ads that don't convert or wondering if anyone will ever buy from me again. The business is sustainable, and it's only growing. I know that entrepreneurship isn't for everyone, and I've had my fair share of sleepless nights and moments of doubt. But the journey has been worth it. The freedom, the ability to create something from nothing, and the satisfaction of knowing I built it all from the ground up, it's all been incredible. I still have a lot to learn, but the excitement I felt when I first launched my store is something I hold on to every day. Looking back, I realized that failure wasn't the end. It was just a stepping stone on the path to success. The biggest risk I took was betting on myself, and it paid off in ways I never could have imagined. If you're considering starting your own business, know that the road will be tough, but if you have the drive and resilience to keep going, it can lead to something incredible. Don't be afraid to fail. Just make sure you learn from it and keep moving forward. I had always dreamed of starting my own business. Ever since I was a kid, I was fascinated by entrepreneurs, people who could create something from nothing and make it thrive. I was always a bit of a dreamer, but the reality of what it takes to build something real hit me like a ton of bricks when I finally took the plunge. This is the story of how I built my company from the ground up, failed more times than I can count, and eventually succeeded. It all started when I graduated college with a business degree. Like many others, I was eager to get into the corporate world, thinking that the 9-to-5 job was my ticket to success. I worked for a couple of different companies, hopping from one job to another, always looking for something that felt right. But nothing did. I was climbing the corporate ladder, but it didn't excite me. I wasn't passionate about the work I was doing, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wanted to be my own boss. One night, while sitting in my tiny apartment, I had an idea that changed the course of my life. I loved fitness, and I had always been into health and wellness. But what if I could merge my love for fitness with my entrepreneurial ambitions? I thought about it, did some research, and realized that there was a growing trend in the wellness space that was still untapped. I saw an opportunity to create a fitness app that would not only track workouts but also integrate personalized meal planning, mental wellness, and community support. A one-stop shop for people who wanted to lead a healthy lifestyle but didn't know where to start. The idea sounded great, but I had no technical skills. I didn't know how to build an app, let alone market it or get people to use it. But I was determined. I started looking for people who could help bring my vision to life. I found a couple of freelance developers who seemed promising and decided to take the plunge. I spent all my savings on the initial development of the app, hoping that it would take off. The first few months were rough. The developers and I hit countless roadblocks. The app wasn't working properly, the design was clunky, and the user experience was frustrating. I was trying to handle everything myself: marketing, content creation, customer support. I remember one night, staying up until 3 a.m., trying to fix bugs in the app and send out social media posts at the same time. I was overwhelmed, but I kept telling myself that I was just getting started, that things would get better. Finally, after months of hard work and setbacks, the app was ready for launch. I spent hours crafting the perfect marketing strategy, creating a website, and preparing for the big reveal. I had a few friends and family members on board as beta testers, and their feedback was invaluable. I made last-minute adjustments, polished the app as much as I could, and pressed launch. The first few days were incredibly exciting. People started downloading the app, and I received positive feedback from a small but dedicated group of users. But then, just as quickly as it had started, the download slowed. I was devastated. I had put so much time, energy, and money into this project, and now it seemed like no one was interested. I couldn't understand what went wrong. I tried running ads, tweaking the app, and offering promotions, but nothing seemed to work. The next few months were a blur of frustration and disappointment. I had a handful of users, but not nearly enough to sustain the business. I was losing money every month, and I had no idea how to turn things around. I considered giving up more times than I can count, but something inside me kept pushing me forward. I wasn't ready to quit yet. I had invested so much into this idea, and I had come too far to let it go now. So, I decided to take a step back and reassess. I started paying closer attention to the feedback from my users, trying to figure out what they liked and what they didn't. It became clear that while the app had potential, the user experience was still lacking. I needed to make some serious changes if I was going to stand a chance. I hired a new team of developers who were more experienced and knew how to solve the problems I was facing. I worked with a designer to revamp the user interface and make the app more intuitive. I also realized that I needed to build a community around the app, not just rely on it to be a tool people used in isolation. So, I launched a forum, started hosting virtual events, and engaged with users on social media to create a sense of belonging. Slowly but surely, things started to improve. The app was better, the user base was growing, and the feedback was becoming more positive. But the real turning point came when I partnered with influencers in the fitness space. I reached out to people with a strong online following and offered them the chance to try the app for free in exchange for sharing their experiences with their audiences. This strategy worked wonders. People started downloading the app in droves, and the word-of-mouth buzz helped create momentum. As the user base grew, I started monetizing the app by offering premium features. I also launched a subscription model that gave users access to personalized coaching, exclusive content, and a range of wellness programs. The money slowly started coming in, and for the first time since the app's launch, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't going to be an overnight success, but it was growing, and that was all that mattered. Looking back, the road was anything but smooth. There were moments when I thought I was going to lose everything. But what I learned through this journey is that entrepreneurship is a game of persistence. There's no formula for success, but if you're willing to put in the work, learn from your mistakes, and adapt along the way, the chances of success go up exponentially. It's not about how many times you fail, it's about how many times you get back up and keep going. Today, my fitness app has millions of active users, and it continues to grow. I've built a team of passionate people who believe in the mission, and we're constantly innovating and improving the app. It's been a long, difficult journey, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. The lessons I've learned along the way have shaped me into the entrepreneur I am today. If there's one thing I could tell anyone thinking about starting their own business, it's this: don't give up. The road will be tough, but the rewards are worth it. Keep pushing forward, and remember that failure is just a stepping stone to success. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, where the biggest thing to do on a Friday night was drive to the local diner, grab a milkshake, and chat with friends. Not exactly the kind of environment that screams entrepreneurial ambition, right? But there was something about me that was always different. While everyone else was content with the standard 9 to 5, I was always dreaming bigger. I just didn't know how or where to start. At the age of 19, I moved to the city. I didn't have much, just a few $1,000 I'd saved up from working various part-time jobs in high school. But I knew one thing for sure: I was determined to make something of myself. It wasn't about making money for me at that point. It was about proving that I could do it. I didn't have connections or a college degree, but I did have one thing that I knew would help me succeed: relentless drive. I started with a simple job in a tech company doing customer support. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a foot in the door, and that's all I needed. I spent my free time learning everything I could about technology, the industry, and the market. If there was one thing I learned quickly, it was that understanding the pain points of a customer was the key to understanding how to build a business. After a year of answering customer queries and learning about software, I got the idea for my first business. It came out of sheer frustration. I was constantly hearing complaints from customers who had trouble with a particular feature of the software. It was something that could easily be improved, and after doing some research, I realized that there was a gap in the market for this type of improvement. I had no idea how to start a software company, but I did know that I had an idea that could solve a problem. That was enough to get me started. I worked nights and weekends, learning how to code and building a prototype of the product. At first, it was rough. The code was sloppy, the user interface was clunky, and I spent more time debugging than actually building. But every time I made progress, I got more excited. The feeling of solving a real problem for real people was addicting. Once I had a working product, I launched it as a beta. The feedback came in quickly, and most of it was exactly what I expected: bug reports, complaints, suggestions for improvements. But it was the small victories that kept me going. A few users mentioned that the software had saved them hours of work. That was all the validation I needed. But even with some early traction, I had no idea how to scale. I didn't have money for marketing, and I didn't know anyone who could help. I felt stuck. But then, something unexpected happened. One of my early beta users, a software engineer at a larger company, reached out. They were impressed with the product and wanted to know if I would be willing to work together. The catch? They wanted to buy the product and integrate it into their own system. I couldn't believe it. This was my chance. The negotiations were slow, but after several weeks of back and forth, I sold the product to the company for a six-figure sum. It was a huge win, but I knew that this wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the beginning. I took the money and reinvested it into new projects. I learned an important lesson through that first sale: finding the right partners or clients can be as important as the product itself. The company I sold to didn't just buy the software. They helped me refine my business model, improve the product, and introduce me to more potential customers. I didn't have the network or experience at the time, but they had both, and I realized that surrounding yourself with the right people could make all the difference. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. After the sale, I decided to start another business. This time, I wanted to take on a completely different industry, e-commerce. I'd seen how successful some of these businesses were, and I thought, how hard could it be? Well, it turned out to be a lot harder than I anticipated. My first attempt at an e-commerce business was a disaster. I spent too much on inventory, didn't do enough market research, and failed to build a brand that resonated with customers. I lost nearly $20,000 in a matter of months. It was a gut punch, and for a while, I was convinced that I wasn't cut out for entrepreneurship after all. But I refused to give up. I took a step back, analyzed my failures, and started to figure out what went wrong. I realized I had underestimated the power of marketing and customer engagement. So, I dove deep into learning everything I could about online marketing, social media ads, influencer marketing, SEO, the works. This time, I launched a new business with a more focused strategy. The second time around, things were different. I carefully crafted a brand that spoke to my target audience, invested heavily in social media campaigns, and worked on building a community around my product. Within 6 months, the business began to take off. It wasn't an overnight success, but I saw steady growth month after month. By the time my third business venture came around, I had the confidence and knowledge to tackle it from day one. This time, I focused on creating a SaaS, software as a service, product that helped small businesses streamline their operations. I learned so much from my previous mistakes that I was able to avoid common pitfalls. The product launched successfully, and within a year, we were hitting 6 figures in revenue. But with success came new challenges. Managing a growing team, handling customer support at scale, and staying ahead of the competition kept me up at night. There were days when I questioned whether I could keep up. But I remembered why I started, to solve problems and to keep pushing forward. Today, I'm running a profitable company with multiple products, a dedicated team, and a growing customer base. I've also branched out into investing, helping other entrepreneurs navigate the challenges I faced in the early years. But the thing that still keeps me going is the same drive that pushed me when I was just starting out, the desire to create something meaningful. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. The road to success was anything but easy, and I made countless mistakes along the way. But every failure taught me something new, and every success reinforced the belief that if you're willing to put in the work, anything is possible. I may have started with nothing more than a few $1,000 and a big dream, but now, I've built something that's far more valuable than just money. It's a testament to the fact that, with persistence, you can go from zero to something much bigger. And as I look to the future, I know that the journey is far from over. I was 22 when I made the biggest gamble of my life. At the time, I was living in a small apartment with a roommate, working a dead-end job that paid me just enough to get by. The hours were long, and the work was soul-sucking. I had always been the kind of person who wanted more freedom, more success, more purpose. I just didn't know how to get there. One evening, after yet another grueling day of sorting through endless paperwork and dealing with angry customers, I found myself staring blankly at my computer screen. I had always been passionate about fashion and had an eye for unique clothing, but I never had the courage to turn it into a business. It wasn't until I came across an article about an entrepreneur who had started their own online clothing brand that the spark was lit. The article told the story of a young entrepreneur who, like me, had started from scratch, living paycheck to paycheck, but through sheer determination and strategic thinking, had built an online clothing empire. They shared their journey, how they had borrowed a small loan from family, started with a basic website, and used social media to build a loyal customer base. Something clicked in me that night. I spent hours researching, reading books, watching videos, and gathering every bit of knowledge I could. I knew I had no money to invest, but I was determined. I scoured thrift stores, searching for pieces of clothing that I could buy cheaply, revamp, and sell online. My first batch of items consisted of vintage jackets, sneakers, and old-school graphic tees. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I took a deep breath and launched my website. The first couple of weeks were disheartening. I didn't make a single sale. I felt foolish for thinking this would work. But instead of giving up, I kept pushing. I posted on Instagram every day, showcasing my products, telling the story of how I had found and curated each item. Slowly, My follower count grew. I started engaging with influencers who had small but loyal followings. I reached out to my friends, offering them discounts if they would help spread the word. In those early days, I barely slept. I'd wake up at 6 a.m., work my day job, come home, and work on my business until 2 a.m. Some nights, I'd only get 4 or 5 hours of sleep. But I didn't care. This was the sacrifice I needed to make to build something meaningful. After 2 months of relentless hustle, I got my first sale. It wasn't a huge order, but it didn't matter. Someone believed in what I was doing. I quickly packed the item, shipped it, and sent a thank you note. I don't think that person realized how much that simple transaction meant to me. It was the beginning of something much bigger. I kept refining my website, improving my branding, and learning as much as I could about marketing. I experimented with Facebook ads, Google search campaigns, and influencer collaborations. The next few months were a blur of trial and error, but eventually, things began to click. My sales slowly grew, and I started reinvesting everything I made back into the business. But with growth came new challenges. As my orders increased, so did my responsibilities. I was still working my full-time job, managing my website, taking care of customer service, and handling inventory. It was overwhelming. There were times when I wanted to throw in the towel. There were days when I couldn't even find the energy to get out of bed. Then came the turning point. One day, while scrolling through Instagram, I came across an ad for a popular e-commerce platform offering a free trial. I figured, why not? I could at least test it out. To my surprise, the platform was far more user-friendly than my website builder. It had features that allowed me to automate much of the process: inventory management, order tracking, customer service. This saved me countless hours. I was still juggling my full-time job with my growing business, but the extra time and efficiency gave me the breathing room I needed to focus on what really mattered: creating a brand that resonated with people. I revamped my marketing strategy, focused more on storytelling, and began sharing the behind-the-scenes process of building the business. I started to develop a connection with my audience, who were excited to support a brand that represented passion and authenticity. The next few months were a whirlwind. I made my first 4-figure month in sales, then 5 figures, and before I knew it, I was making enough to quit my day job. I remember the exact moment I called my boss and handed in my resignation. It was terrifying but exhilarating at the same time. It wasn't smooth sailing after that. There were still growing pains. I had to hire help, learn how to manage employees, and deal with the increasing complexity of the business. But I kept pushing, kept learning, kept failing forward. I made mistakes, plenty of them, but each failure taught me something valuable. Fast forward a year, and my online clothing brand was doing well. I had a small team, an efficient operation, and a loyal customer base. My brand had become a community, a lifestyle. But I wasn't content. I knew there was more I could do. I started thinking about scaling, about expanding into physical retail. The thought of it was daunting. I had no experience with brick-and-mortar stores. But I didn't let fear stop me. I started small. I found a local spot to lease and transformed it into a small boutique. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I stocked it with a carefully curated selection of products and held events to build buzz. The first few months were slow, but I stuck with it. Eventually, foot traffic picked up. People started coming in, not just for the clothes, but for the experience. They wanted to be a part of the story. Now, 3 years after starting my online store, I have a successful brand with both an online and physical presence. My team has grown, and I've learned more about business than I ever thought possible. But most importantly, I've learned that the journey doesn't end. There are always new challenges, new goals, and new opportunities. And I'm ready for whatever comes next. Looking back, I realized that the key to my success wasn't any one thing. It was about persistence, about continuing to push forward even when things felt impossible. It was about learning from my mistakes and staying true to my vision. So, to anyone out there thinking about starting a business, if I can do it, so can you. It won't be easy, and there will be times when you want to quit. But if you stick with it, you'll come out on the other side stronger, smarter, and more successful than you ever imagined. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. A few years ago, I was living in a tiny, rundown apartment in a part of town that most people wouldn't want to be caught dead in after dark. My savings were almost gone, and I could feel the weight of the pressure pushing me down. I had just left a job that I hated, but I had no real plan for what came next. I knew I wanted to build something, be my own boss, but I was also terrified. I had no prior experience running a business and no idea where to even start. My only saving grace was my passion for photography and the idea of creating something unique that could help people capture moments in their lives. The idea hit me one evening while I was scrolling through Instagram. I came across a post from a wedding photographer. It wasn't the typical cookie-cutter type of photo that you see in every wedding album. It was raw, emotional, and felt real. I was hooked. I knew I had to do something similar, but with my own twist. So, I made the bold decision to turn my passion for photography into a full-time business. I bought a secondhand camera, spent a few weeks researching everything I could about running a business, and put all my remaining money into building a basic website. The website was simple, nothing too fancy, but it was mine. It showcased some of my best photos and detailed the services I could offer. I knew I wasn't the most skilled photographer at the time, but I also knew that with hard work, I could improve. I started reaching out to local businesses, offering discounted shoots in exchange for exposure. At first, I didn't have much luck. People either ignored my emails or said they weren't interested. But I kept going. I learned how to pitch myself better, how to show potential clients the value I could bring, and how to put together packages that were both affordable and enticing. Slowly, I began to land gigs. It wasn't a lot at first, but every shoot added to my portfolio. I learned how to handle lighting, composition, editing, and, most importantly, client communication. The turning point came when I did a photo shoot for a small boutique. The owner loved my work so much that she recommended me to a friend who was getting married. I got my first wedding gig, and that was a game changer. Weddings are a big deal, and word of mouth from a satisfied client can go a long way. After that wedding, I started getting more and more referrals, and my portfolio began to grow. But as my business started to gain traction, I realized that my personal life was being sacrificed. I was working around the clock, often staying up late editing photos, responding to emails, and trying to keep up with all the administrative tasks. I quickly realized I couldn't do everything myself. I needed help. But hiring my first employee was nerve-wracking. I wasn't sure if I could afford it, but I knew I couldn't scale my business without extra hands. I hired a part-time assistant to help with administrative tasks like scheduling, invoicing, and social media management. It was a huge relief, and it allowed me to focus more on the creative side of the business. As the business continued to grow, I had to make some tough decisions. I decided to stop taking on lower-paying jobs that weren't aligned with the direction I wanted to go in. I raised my rates, which was another nerve-wracking step, but it was necessary for the sustainability of my business. Surprisingly, my bookings didn't drop. In fact, they increased. It was as if clients respected the fact that I was charging more and perceived my work as more valuable. I also focused on building a brand. I wanted to be known for a specific style of photography, something that felt personal and unique. I started sharing my story with potential clients, letting them know that I wasn't just another photographer. I was someone who cared deeply about capturing authentic moments, someone who could make them feel comfortable in front of the camera, and someone who could deliver images that told a story. My social media presence grew, and I began to get attention from influencers, bloggers, and even some local celebrities. The growth of my business wasn't without its struggles. There were times when I had to hustle hard to meet deadlines, deal with difficult clients, and find ways to get more exposure. I had to learn how to handle rejection, criticism, and even burnout. But through it all, I kept my eyes on the bigger picture. I kept reminding myself that every challenge was an opportunity to learn and grow. Eventually, I was able to move into a much nicer apartment. It wasn't a mansion, but it was a far cry from the cramped, dingy space I had started in. I was now working full-time as a photographer, had a small team of trusted employees, and was even able to start hiring other photographers to work with me on larger projects. I had gone from being a one-person operation to running a small business with a growing client base. But despite the growth, I still felt like I had so much more to accomplish. The real breakthrough for me came when I realized that I needed to diversify. I couldn't just rely on weddings and portraits. So, I started offering photography workshops, where I taught others how to improve their photography skills. I also launched an online store where I sold presets and photography guides. These moves allowed me to scale even further providing multiple streams of income while still staying true to my passion for photography. Now, I'm not saying I'm rich or famous, but I've created a sustainable business that I'm incredibly proud of. There were so many times along the way when I wanted to give up or when it felt like the odds were stacked against me. But looking back, I realized that every struggle, every failure, and every moment of doubt only helped me build something stronger. To this day, I still get imposter syndrome every now and then, questioning whether I deserve to be where I am. But then I look at my work, my team, and my clients, and I know I've built something real. I've built a business that I'm proud of, and I've built a life that I never thought was possible. And while I still face challenges, I now know that with hard work, persistence, and a little bit of faith in yourself, anything is possible. Building a business isn't easy, and it's certainly not a linear path. But if you're willing to put in the work and learn from your mistakes, you can turn your passion into a thriving business. I did it, and you can too. I've always been an optimist. Even as a kid, I believed in the idea that hard work and determination would eventually lead to success, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. But when I left college, armed with nothing but a marketing degree and a head full of dreams, reality hit me like a brick wall. I didn't have a fancy network. I didn't come from a family with connections. In fact, I came from a small, working-class town where the idea of big dreams was more of a joke than anything else. People worked regular jobs, lived regular lives, and didn't think twice about just getting by. But I wanted more. I wanted to build something of my own, something that would make a real impact. At first, like many others, I took the usual route. I worked as an intern for a marketing agency, did my time, and hustled to get my foot in the door. But after a year of unpaid work and long hours for minimum wage, it became clear to me that the traditional 9 to 5 route wasn't for me. I knew I could do more, but I had no idea what that more looked like. One day, I was scrolling through social media when I came across an article about how successful entrepreneurs were creating passive income streams online. The idea was simple: use the internet to build something that works for you while you sleep. I was intrigued, but also skeptical. Could I really create a business out of thin air? Was it even possible? I spent the next few weeks obsessing over online business models, listening to podcasts, reading articles, and watching YouTube videos about how people were making money from their laptops. There were a lot of gimmicks, a lot of people promising get-rich-quick schemes, but amidst all the noise, I found a few genuine stories. People were actually succeeding in online marketing, creating digital products, and building communities. And I thought to myself, why not me? I didn't have much to start with, just $200 saved up from my internship job, but I was determined to make it work. I decided to dive into e-commerce, mainly because it seemed like the lowest barrier to entry and the most scalable. I could create an online store and start selling products without needing a huge investment. The first step was picking a niche. I spent days researching trending products, analyzing competition, and trying to figure out what would stand out. I was looking for something that wasn't oversaturated but had enough demand to make a profit. After much trial and error, I landed on custom phone accessories. They were affordable to make, highly customizable, and people were always looking for unique designs. Now came the tricky part: building a website. I had no experience with web development, so I turned to platforms like Shopify and WordPress to get my store off the ground. I spent hours customizing themes, uploading product images, and setting up payment gateways. It was frustrating, especially when the site didn't look the way I wanted, but I kept pushing forward. With the website finally up and running, I had one big hurdle left: getting customers. I had zero experience in digital marketing, so I decided to start with social media ads. I set aside a small budget, around $100, and ran my first Facebook ad campaign. To my surprise, it didn't completely flop. I made a few sales, and I was thrilled, but I knew it wasn't enough to call it a success. I needed to scale, and I needed to do it quickly. I reinvested every penny I made back into ads, constantly tweaking and optimizing the campaigns. I tested different ad copy, images, and targeting to see what worked. I also experimented with influencer marketing, reaching out to small influencers with 10,000 to 50,000 followers. I offered them free products in exchange for shout-outs on their Instagram pages. Slowly but surely, sales started to pick up. The real turning point came when I decided to invest in a professional photographer to take high-quality product photos. My sales skyrocketed. People were suddenly more interested in my store, and I began seeing a steady stream of traffic and sales. My store wasn't just another generic e-commerce site. It was a brand people wanted to buy from. But with success came new challenges. I had to figure out how to handle shipping, customer service, and inventory. I didn't have much capital, so I started working with suppliers who could fulfill orders directly to my customers. This meant that I didn't have to manage inventory or worry about shipping, but it also meant I had to rely heavily on my suppliers to deliver on time. One delay could ruin a customer's experience, and that was something I couldn't afford. I began to learn the hard way that running a business wasn't just about making sales. It was about building a reliable system, one that could handle growth. The first time a customer sent a complaint about a late order, I panicked. But I responded professionally, issued a refund, and offered a discount on their next purchase. Slowly, I built a reputation for excellent customer service, which helped me build a loyal customer base. The next big leap was scaling. By this point, I had a solid foundation, but I was still working out of my bedroom. I knew I needed to hire help. The first person I hired was a virtual assistant to help with customer service and social media management. It was a small step, but it freed up my time to focus on the bigger picture. As sales grew, I hired more people to handle different aspects of the business. I also began to expand the product range, introducing new designs and exploring new markets. My business went from a one-person operation to a small team, and we were now generating consistent six-figure revenues. I even started to think about the future. Could I turn this into something that would eventually allow me to step away and enjoy the fruits of my labor? The answer, I found, was yes. It took years of hard work, late nights, and endless learning, but in the end, my persistence paid off. I had created a business that not only provided for me financially, but also gave me the freedom I had always dreamed of. I no longer had to answer to anyone. I wasn't confined to a cubicle or a desk job. I was building something I was proud of, something I had done on my own. Looking back, it wasn't the product or the business model that made the difference, it was the mindset. The ability to keep going when things didn't work out, the willingness to learn from mistakes, and the commitment to pushing through every obstacle that came my way. Those were the qualities that truly made the difference. I'm still running my business today, and while things have gotten easier in some ways, the challenges never really go away. But that's the beauty of entrepreneurship. It's a never-ending journey, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that success doesn't happen overnight. It's a combination of timing, hard work, and a little bit of luck. And above all else, it requires the relentless belief that you can make it happen, even when the odds are stacked against you. When I was in my early 20s, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. Like a lot of young people, I was just trying to make ends meet and figure things out. I worked a series of dead-end jobs, mostly in retail and fast food, and always felt like I was just passing through life without any real direction. But everything changed one fateful night when I decided to take a leap of faith. It all started at a small convenience store I worked at during my last year of college. I was earning minimum wage and living paycheck to paycheck, barely covering rent and bills. One evening, while working the night shift, a regular customer came in. His name was Paul, and he was an older man in his mid-50s, always impeccably dressed and carrying himself with an air of quiet confidence. Over the months of seeing him every week, we became acquaintances of sorts, exchanging pleasantries whenever he came in. That night, something was different. He walked up to the counter with a pack of gum and a bottle of soda, but he didn't leave after paying like usual. Instead, he leaned in slightly and asked me, "What are you doing with your life?" I wasn't sure how to respond. I was 22, living in a tiny apartment with a mismatched collection of furniture, and I had no real goals beyond getting through the next day. But for some reason, Paul's question stuck with me. "What do you mean?" I asked, still trying to figure out where he was coming from. Paul smiled, his eyes twinkling with a kind of knowing that I couldn't quite grasp at the time. "You know, kid, you've got to be doing something bigger than this. You've got to have a plan, a vision for your future. Trust me, you won't want to be doing this for the rest of your life." That simple conversation, though short, became the catalyst for everything that would follow. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what Paul said. I'd always heard people talk about having a plan, but I never really understood what that meant. Was I supposed to have some grand vision? How was I supposed to figure that out? I felt overwhelmed. I didn't know it at the time, but that conversation would set me on a path that would change my life forever. Over the next couple of weeks, I started paying attention to everything around me with new eyes. I watched people in the store, and I saw how many were simply going through the motions. I started noticing the little things. How some products were always out of stock, how customers had to wait in long lines because there weren't enough registers open, how some items seemed completely ignored while others flew off the shelves. There was a pattern there, an inefficiency that I began to obsess over. One day, I decided to pitch an idea to my manager. I suggested that we could streamline our stock management system by implementing a more efficient tracking method for inventory. It was a simple concept, but it had the potential to reduce the amount of out-of-stock situations and help customers get what they needed faster. To my surprise, my manager was intrigued. He didn't immediately embrace the idea, but he agreed to let me try it out. It was a small step, but it was a start. I worked late every night for weeks, experimenting with different systems and methods of tracking inventory. I even created a simple database on my personal computer to keep track of sales and stock levels. Slowly but surely, things started improving. Sales went up, and customers started noticing. I felt like I was finally getting the hang of this business stuff. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted more. I wanted to create something that was entirely my own. I started reading books on entrepreneurship, business management, and investing. I spent hours scouring the internet for free resources and taking online courses on everything from marketing to accounting. I was determined to learn as much as I could, to equip myself with the tools I would need to one day build a business. I knew I needed capital to get started, but I had no idea how to raise money. My savings account was virtually empty, and I didn't have any family or friends who could invest in my idea. But that didn't stop me. One day, I came across an article about crowdfunding. It was a game changer. I realized that I could raise money for a project without needing a large initial investment. The idea was simple. I would create a product that people actually wanted, then use the power of the internet to fund it. But what product? After a lot of trial and error, I settled on creating an eco-friendly, reusable water bottle. It was a saturated market, but I noticed that most of the existing products were either cheap and flimsy or overpriced for what they were. I saw an opportunity to create a high-quality, stylish bottle that was both functional and affordable. I worked for months designing prototypes, researching materials, and figuring out how to manufacture the bottles. It was tough, and there were countless setbacks, but I was determined. Finally, after months of planning, I launched a Kickstarter campaign. I didn't expect to hit my goal immediately. In fact, I was prepared for failure. But within a week, my campaign was funded. People were actually interested in what I was offering. The momentum started building, and I could feel the excitement in the air. I used the money to order my first batch of bottles, and within a few months, they were ready to ship. The first batch sold out in days, and before I knew it, I had a small, but growing, business on my hands. I reinvested every penny into expanding the product line and improving the brand. As the business grew, I started to face new challenges. I had to hire employees, navigate the complexities of shipping and distribution, and deal with customer service issues. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something meaningful. I wasn't just working to pay bills. I was building something that could make a real impact. Years passed, and the company became a success. I expanded into new markets, launched additional products, and even managed to secure some big-name partnerships. It wasn't easy, but looking back, I realized that everything I went through, the struggle, the self-doubt, the late nights, was worth it. I often think back to that night at the convenience store when Paul asked me, "What are you doing with your life?" It's a question that still motivates me to this day. Because I can't help but think, if I had stayed in that job, if I had never taken the chance to learn, to grow, and to take risks, I'd still be working the night shift, wondering what could have been. In the end, it was that simple conversation that changed everything. It gave me the push I needed to stop settling and start building. And for that, I'll always be grateful. I was 24 years old when I took a huge risk that would change the course of my life forever. I had no business experience, no connections, and no idea what I was doing, but I had a burning desire to create something from scratch. I had always been the kind of person who wanted more than the 9 to 5 grind. The endless cycle of working for someone else, building someone else's dream, just never sat well with me. So, I decided to step out on my own. It all started when I realized that there was a huge gap in the market for a specific type of service. I had been a regular customer at a local gym, and during my workouts, I'd often overhear conversations among the other gym-goers about how difficult it was to find affordable, reliable, and effective personal trainers. The gym I went to had trainers, but they were expensive, and there was no real way to know if they would meet your specific needs. Some people were being charged ridiculous rates, and others were simply not getting results. It clicked for me. There had to be a way to bring high-quality personal training to the masses in a more accessible way. But instead of being another gym that offered personal trainers, I decided to build a platform that would connect clients with certified personal trainers in their area, but with a twist. The trainers would set their own rates, and the platform would take a small cut. It would allow people to find trainers that were a good fit for them, whether they were looking for someone with a specific skill set, budget, or personality. I had no idea how to build a platform like that, but I knew I had to try. I started with research. I spent every free moment reading about the fitness industry, studying the platforms that existed, and gathering as much information as I could. It was overwhelming. There were so many pieces to the puzzle: website development, payment systems, marketing, customer service, legal requirements. But every time I felt like giving up, I remembered that feeling of frustration I had when I saw people struggle to find trainers that worked for them. I couldn't let that be the status quo. I was determined to build something better. With little more than a vague idea in my head, I reached out to a few web developers. I had no experience with coding or website design, but I had an idea of what I wanted the platform to look like and how I wanted it to function. I had a very limited budget, so I had to be resourceful. I hired a freelance developer who had worked on a few small projects and seemed like a good fit. The first few weeks were filled with trial and error. Every time we hit a roadblock, I felt like I was falling behind. But with each problem, I learned more about the process and what I needed to do to make the platform a reality. As the platform slowly started to take shape, I realized that I needed to get the word out. I didn't have a large budget for advertising, so I turned to social media and grassroots marketing. I started by reaching out to local gyms, fitness communities, and personal trainers. I offered them an easy way to make extra money by signing up for my platform. I worked tirelessly to build relationships with trainers who were open-minded and saw the potential of my idea. I told them, "This is your chance to get in on the ground floor. We're building something big here." I also got creative with how I marketed to clients. I offered free trials, discounted sessions, and special promotions to attract new customers. It wasn't glamorous, and there were plenty of times when I thought it was all going to fall apart, but I pushed through. Slowly but surely, people began to sign up. As the platform gained traction, the first major obstacle arose: scaling. I had built something that worked on a small scale, but now the demand was growing faster than I anticipated. The system started to break down, and I quickly realized that I couldn't do everything myself. I had to start hiring help. But that's when the real challenges began. I was bringing people on board, but managing a team was a whole different beast. I had to learn how to delegate, how to motivate, and how to create a company culture from scratch. I wasn't a manager by nature, but I had no choice but to step up. There were plenty of sleepless nights where I questioned my decision to dive into entrepreneurship. I thought about quitting, but each time, I reminded myself of why I started. I was driven by the desire to create something that would truly help people. I had a vision, and I wasn't about to give up on it. Through trial and error, I started to find my rhythm. I brought in a customer service team to handle inquiries, a marketing expert to fine-tune our campaigns, and an operations manager to streamline processes. It wasn't smooth sailing, but we were slowly growing. Then came a breakthrough moment. A fitness influencer with over 1 million followers signed up for the platform. They posted about it on their social media, and suddenly we had a massive surge in traffic. The influencer's endorsement gave us the credibility we needed to build momentum. People started signing up in droves, and more trainers joined the platform. It felt like everything was finally falling into place. But as we scaled, so did the problems. I had never anticipated the sheer volume of logistical issues that would come with growth. The platform started experiencing technical glitches, and payment processing became a nightmare. Customers were getting frustrated, and some were threatening to leave. It felt like we were constantly putting out fires. During one particularly stressful week, I was on a call with a client who was angry about a booking issue. In the middle of the conversation, my phone rang with another issue, another payment failure. I couldn't keep up, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely overwhelmed. But I didn't give up. I doubled down on fixing the problems. I brought in a tech team to overhaul the platform's back end, and we started working on building a stronger customer support system. It took time, but eventually the issues began to subside and the platform stabilized. At that point, I realized that entrepreneurship was not just about having a good idea. It was about resilience. You have to be able to push through the difficult moments and keep going, even when everything seems like it's falling apart. Years later, my platform had become one of the leading services for finding personal trainers. We had expanded internationally, and what started as a small idea in my living room had grown into a multi-million-dollar business. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far we had come, but the road was never easy. It was filled with countless sleepless nights, difficult decisions, and moments of doubt. But those challenges were what made the success so sweet. If you're thinking about starting your own business, I want you to remember this. The hardest part is often the beginning. It's the late nights, the self-doubt, the fear of failure that make you question whether it's all worth it. But if you keep going, if you push through the tough times, you'll eventually find the success you're looking for. It won't come overnight, but with perseverance, anything is possible. So, keep going, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. You just might be closer to success than you think. I was 22 years old when I made my first attempt at entrepreneurship. At the time, I was fresh out of college with a business degree and a head full of ideas. My friends and family were supportive but skeptical. "Don't get your hopes up too high," my dad said one evening over dinner. "It's tough out there. You might fail, but you'll learn something." I shrugged it off. I was determined to make something of myself. I had always been a tech enthusiast, so I decided to dive into the world of mobile app development. My idea was simple: create a productivity app that would help people manage their time more effectively. At the time, there were plenty of time management tools on the market, but none of them really spoke to me. They all felt rigid, too complex for the average person to use. I wanted to create something more intuitive, something that felt like it was actually helping, not just keeping track of tasks. With a small budget of $2,000 saved up from part-time jobs and odd freelance gigs, I set to work. I rented a small office space in a co-working hub and spent countless hours coding and designing. I didn't know much about the app market, but I was willing to learn. There were days I barely slept, working on designs, tweaking the app's user interface, and coding late into the night. Despite all the hard work, the first version of my app was far from perfect. It was buggy, slow, and clunky, but I pushed forward. I launched it on the App Store in early 2017 with little fanfare. I didn't have a huge marketing budget, and I was still figuring out the ropes of app promotion. My first download came a week after launch, and I remember the thrill of seeing the notification on my phone. A real, live person had downloaded my app. I was ecstatic, but that excitement quickly turned into disappointment. The app got a handful of downloads over the next few months, but I wasn't getting the feedback I was hoping for. Most users either didn't use the app long enough to get a real sense of its value or didn't understand how it worked. I didn't have enough time to really understand my user base, nor did I know how to improve the product in a way that would attract more downloads. The app's rating was low, and users were dropping off faster than I could fix the bugs. I had sunk a lot of money into this project, and I was on the verge of giving up. But I didn't. Around the same time, I stumbled upon a blog post that changed my perspective. The writer, an experienced entrepreneur, discussed the importance of market research and customer feedback. He mentioned how many startup founders fail not because they lack skill, but because they build products in isolation without actually understanding what the customer needs. I was missing the mark, big time. That was when I decided to pivot. I spent the next few months completely reworking the app. I started conducting surveys, interviews, and focus groups with potential users. I watched them use the app and listened to their pain points. It became clear that the app wasn't addressing the real needs of users. People didn't want a fancy productivity app. They just wanted a simple way to organize their tasks without feeling overwhelmed. So, I simplified everything. I reduced the number of features, streamlined the design, and focused on one core value proposition: simplicity. I also made sure to improve the app's performance and fix the bugs that were causing frustration. I relaunched the app in late 2017, this time with a better marketing strategy. I worked with influencers, reached out to productivity bloggers, and ran targeted ads on social media. Slowly but surely, downloads began to increase. By 2018, my app was starting to gain some traction. I was still working out of a co-working space, but I could feel the momentum building. The app was averaging 100 downloads per day, and I had a small but dedicated user base. It wasn't making much money, but it was enough to cover my costs and give me hope that I was on the right path. In 2019, I made another bold move. I decided to go all in. I quit my day job, invested every last bit of savings into the app, and hired a small team of developers and marketers. I needed to scale the app quickly if I wanted to compete in the crowded market. I knew it was a risk, but I had spent so much time building this app that I wasn't about to let it fizzle out. By 2020, the app had grown exponentially. It was consistently ranking in the top 10 in productivity in the App Store, and I had begun to monetize through premium subscriptions and ads. The app's simplicity and focus on user experience resonated with people, and it was getting rave reviews. I had finally turned the corner. But the journey wasn't without its hurdles. There were many sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and financial stress along the way. I had to make tough decisions, such as cutting costs by outsourcing some development work and focusing on the features that really mattered. As 2021 rolled around, my app was doing well enough for me to start thinking about the future. I had built a profitable company, and while I wasn't a millionaire, I had created something sustainable. I had learned more than I could ever have imagined about entrepreneurship, from coding to marketing to customer relations. I knew that success wasn't just about having a good idea. It was about persistence, learning from mistakes, and being willing to adapt when things weren't working. Now, in 2025, my app has grown into a platform used by millions of people worldwide. We've expanded into multiple languages, integrated with other productivity tools, and added a suite of features based on user feedback. Our revenue has allowed us to hire a team of over 50 people, and we've secured venture capital to help scale even further. We've started releasing new products, and there are talks of potential partnerships with larger tech companies. I still remember the days when I was sitting alone in my tiny office, staring at a bug-filled app that barely worked. Back then, it seemed like a distant dream that I could make it, but now I look back and realize that every failure, every frustrating moment, every sleepless night was a part of the process. It wasn't an overnight success. It wasn't a smooth ride. But it was my ride, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Being an entrepreneur isn't about getting it right on the first try. It's about learning, adapting, and being relentless in the pursuit of your vision. If you're just starting out, don't get discouraged by the setbacks. Embrace them, because they're part of the journey. You don't have to be perfect to succeed. You just have to keep moving forward. I never thought I'd end up where I am now, but looking back, every step I took, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, led me to this moment. I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth, nor did I have some magical breakthrough that set me apart from everyone else. I started from scratch, worked relentlessly, and learned from my failures. Today, I run a company that's making waves in an industry that seemed out of reach just a few years ago. This is my story. It all started when I was in my early 20s. I wasn't interested in school or the typical 9 to 5 job. To be honest, I always felt like there was something more to life than what everyone else was doing. My friends were all headed toward comfortable careers, and I was always the odd one out, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. It wasn't that I was lazy or didn't want to work. I just couldn't wrap my head around the idea of living for the weekend and working for someone else's dream. I had no real plan at first, but I did know one thing. I wanted to be my own boss. I didn't want to rely on anyone else for my success or happiness. So, I decided to take a leap. I quit my job as a retail associate, much to the shock of my family, and threw myself into the world of entrepreneurship. For the first few months, it felt like I was walking through mud. I had no idea what I was doing, and it was obvious. I tried a variety of things, selling products online, creating content, even trying my hand at dropshipping. Each time, I made some money but always seemed to lose it just as quickly as it came. I would spend hours researching, trying to find the magic formula that would make me rich overnight. But nothing worked. There were moments when I considered quitting, when I thought maybe this whole entrepreneurship thing just wasn't for me. But here's the thing. I learned a lot in those early days. I learned how to fail, and more importantly, how to get back up again. Every failure taught me something valuable, even if it wasn't immediately obvious. For example, I learned that people don't buy products, they buy experiences. I learned that simply offering a good product wasn't enough to stand out in the crowded online market. I learned about marketing, about branding, about customer relationships. I made countless mistakes, but each one brought me closer to figuring out what would work. After about a year of trial and error, I finally found something that clicked. It wasn't dropshipping or selling random products online. It was a niche business. I had been tinkering with the idea of creating a high-end line of eco-friendly home goods. At first, it seemed like a small idea, but I was passionate about it. I wanted to create products that were both beautiful and sustainable. I spent months sourcing materials, designing the products, and setting up an online store. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But for the first time, I felt like I was onto something real. I launched the website, and the first few weeks were slow. I was barely getting any traffic, and the few sales I made didn't come close to covering the cost of production. I knew I had to do something drastic if I was going to make this work. So, I put all my efforts into marketing. I learned about social media algorithms, SEO, email marketing, and influencer collaborations. Slowly but surely, the sales began to trickle in. It wasn't much at first, but it was a start. And that start was all I needed. Within 6 months, I started to see significant growth. My website traffic was increasing, my products were being shared on social media, and I had customers leaving glowing reviews. It felt like a dream come true, but I knew that maintaining growth would require constant effort. I couldn't just sit back and relax. I had to keep pushing. One of the biggest challenges I faced was scaling the business. As demand grew, I needed to hire help. But hiring people when you're still a small business is risky. I wasn't ready to take on a full team, but I knew I couldn't do it alone anymore. I took a chance and hired 2 part-time employees. It was a tough decision because I wasn't sure if the business could support additional payroll expenses. But it turned out to be one of the best decisions I made. With help, I was able to focus on expanding the brand while they handled the day-to-day operations. By the end of my second year, the business had taken off in a way I never could have imagined. We had grown to the point where we were shipping products across the country and even internationally. I was now able to pay myself a salary, something I had never thought would happen. But I didn't stop there. I reinvested every penny back into the business to keep growing. One of the most important lessons I've learned on this journey is the power of community. It wasn't just the products that made my business successful, it was the loyal customers who believed in what we were doing. They became our brand ambassadors, spreading the word and advocating for our mission. I made sure to engage with every customer, respond to feedback, and show appreciation for their support. I realized that the people who bought from me weren't just customers, they were a part of something bigger. 3 years into my business, we were featured in a major publication, which skyrocketed our visibility. That was the turning point. Orders flooded in from all over the world. But with that growth came new challenges. Our production capacity was stretched thin, and I had to make the difficult decision to either outsource manufacturing or invest in a larger space. I chose the latter. I found a warehouse, upgraded our equipment, and hired more employees. We were growing at an unprecedented rate, and I had to stay ahead of the curve to maintain that momentum. Fast forward to today, and the company I started in my small apartment has become a recognized brand in the eco-friendly home goods industry. We now have a team of 20 people, and we're constantly innovating and pushing the envelope on sustainability. It's surreal to think about how far we've come, but I never forget where I started. There were days when I felt like giving up, days when the money wasn't coming in, and I wasn't sure if I was making the right decisions. But I stayed committed to the journey. I'm not saying it was easy, and I'm not saying I have all the answers. But I can say that persistence, adaptability, and a willingness to learn from failure are key ingredients for success. If you're thinking about starting your own business, take the plunge. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Just remember, every step, every setback, brings you closer to your goals. Looking back, I realize the most important thing I've learned is that success isn't about avoiding failure, it's about how you respond to it. And for anyone who's struggling, I want to say this: keep going. You never know how close you are to your breakthrough. I've always been the kind of person who thrives on doing things differently, pushing limits, and creating something from scratch. My entrepreneurial journey didn't begin in some fancy tech incubator or with a massive investment. In fact, it started in a small, rundown apartment with barely enough rent money to get by. At the time, I was working a 9-to-5 job that left me feeling drained and uninspired. I knew there had to be more to life than punching in and out on someone else's clock. My days were spent in an office cubicle where my only task was answering emails and filling out spreadsheets. It was soul-crushing, and the thought of spending the rest of my life this way made my stomach turn. I started looking into side hustles, anything that could get me out of this rut. I experimented with dropshipping, tried affiliate marketing, and even dabbled in selling digital products. But nothing clicked. Everything felt like a hustle without purpose. I was tired of the empty promises I read online about making thousands in passive income. It seemed like everyone on YouTube and Instagram was living the dream, but the reality for me was different. I wasn't getting rich from my efforts, and it seemed like I was just throwing money into a void. Then one night, as I scrolled aimlessly through social media, I came across a post about creating your own brand. It wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme. It was about creating something real, something valuable. I thought about it for a long time, and I realized that's what I wanted to do. Create a brand that wasn't about selling some gimmick, but about solving a real problem. That's when the idea for my first product came to me. A sustainable, eco-friendly notebook made from recycled materials. At the time, there was a growing trend towards sustainability, and I realized I could tap into this market. It was a simple product, but it had a story behind it. It wasn't just about the notebook. It was about making a difference in the world, even if that difference was small. But here's the thing. While the idea seemed great, I had no clue how to make it happen. I didn't have the technical skills to create a product from scratch, nor did I have the money to invest in manufacturing. The reality of being a broke 20-something with no industry connections quickly hit me. But instead of giving up, I started learning. I spent hours reading about product design, supply chains, and sustainable materials. I watched YouTube tutorials on how to build a brand from the ground up. I even enrolled in a couple of online courses to understand the basics of manufacturing and logistics. My first hurdle was finding a manufacturer who could produce the notebooks at a reasonable price while keeping them sustainable. I spent weeks emailing companies, calling suppliers, and learning the ins and outs of product sourcing. It was exhausting and often discouraging when I got replies like, "We don't do small orders," or "The minimum order quantity is too high." Every rejection made me question if I was wasting my time. Then, one day, I found a supplier willing to work with me. It wasn't perfect. There were issues with the first batch of notebooks, such as color mismatches and design flaws, but I had a product. And to me, that was a huge win. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. I had a tangible product in my hands, something I could sell. I started designing a website, and I spent sleepless nights working on marketing strategies. I didn't have a big budget, so I focused on organic growth. I reached out to influencers in the sustainability space, offering them free products in exchange for honest reviews. Slowly but surely, the brand started gaining traction. The first sale I made felt like a victory, but it was only the beginning. I learned that growing a business wasn't about making one sale. It was about building a community of people who believed in what you were doing. I started interacting with my customers, asking them for feedback, and using that information to improve the product and the brand. I also started a blog to share the values behind the brand, the journey, and the challenges I was overcoming. It resonated with people who felt the same way I did about sustainability. The real turning point came when I was able to get the product into a local boutique. The owner was a fan of sustainable products, and after seeing the notebooks, she agreed to carry them in her store. This was huge for me because it wasn't just about making online sales anymore. It was about being able to walk into a physical store and see my product on the shelf. That moment, walking into that boutique, I felt like I had truly made it. From there, things started to snowball. The brand began to gain recognition, not just locally, but nationally. The key was focusing on my mission and creating something that resonated with people. It wasn't just about making money. It was about making a positive impact. As the brand grew, I was able to bring on a small team to help with production, customer service, and marketing. It was a dream come true. The hustle was paying off. Fast forward to today, and my brand is thriving. We've expanded our product line to include other eco-friendly office supplies and even clothing made from sustainable fabrics. We've partnered with nonprofits to plant trees with every purchase, and we've hosted workshops on sustainability. But despite all the success, I've never lost sight of the reason I started, to create something that mattered. I'll be honest, there were times when I wanted to quit. There were moments when the stress was overwhelming and the setbacks felt insurmountable. But looking back now, I wouldn't change a thing. Every failure, every mistake, every sleepless night was part of the journey that got me to where I am today. The best advice I can give anyone starting out is simple. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to start small. And most importantly, don't be afraid to believe in yourself when no one else does. Being an entrepreneur is a constant grind, but it's worth it. It's not about finding the easiest way to make money. It's about creating something real, something that reflects who you are and what you care about. If you stick with it, even when it feels impossible, you'll start seeing the fruits of your labor in ways you never imagined. The key is to keep going, even when the journey seems long and uncertain. So, to anyone out there wondering if they should take the leap into entrepreneurship, do it. Start where you are. Learn as you go. And never, ever give up on your vision. The world needs more people who dare to do things differently. I was 22 when I decided to leave my stable job and dive headfirst into the world of entrepreneurship. I had always dreamed of building something of my own, but until that point, the comfort of a steady paycheck kept me from taking the leap. But something changed the day I sat down at a coffee shop, scrolling through social media, seeing a post from a former coworker who had just sold his startup for 7 figures. It was a reminder that life could be different, and if someone else could do it, why couldn't I? At the time, I was working as a project manager for a mid-sized tech company. It wasn't glamorous, but the pay was decent, and the work was steady. Still, I found myself growing restless. I had always been the type to dream big, but never took the steps to make those dreams a reality. The day I read that post, something inside me clicked. I realized that I had spent enough time talking about what I wanted to do and not enough time actually doing it. The first step, I thought, was to figure out exactly what kind of business I wanted to start. I knew it needed to be something I was passionate about, something that aligned with my skills, and most importantly, something that filled a real need in the market. I spent the next few weeks researching industries, reading articles, talking to people, and brainstorming ideas. I went through a dozen business ideas, but none of them felt right. Then one day, while I was working on a project at my job, I had an idea that seemed to click. It came from a problem I had noticed in my own life. I was constantly struggling to keep my personal and professional tasks organized. I had tried countless apps, planners, and systems, but nothing worked the way I wanted it to. It was then that I realized there was a massive gap in the market for an all-in-one productivity tool that was intuitive, simple, and adaptable to the needs of different kinds of people. That was the idea that would eventually become my first startup, an app designed to help people organize their lives in a way that felt personal to them. The next few months were a blur of late nights, coffee-fueled brainstorming sessions, and moments of self-doubt. I spent all my savings building a prototype, hiring developers, and getting feedback from potential users. I didn't have much money to start with, but I was determined to make it work. I reached out to friends and family for advice, but mostly, I kept my plans close to my chest. I wanted to build something real before I started talking about it too much. The hardest part, by far, was the launch. I had no marketing budget, no big influencer backing, and no previous track record to show for myself. But I had something that many other startups didn't, a deep understanding of the problem I was solving. I knew exactly what my target audience needed because I was them. So, I started small. I reached out to a handful of online communities, Reddit, product forums, Facebook groups, and introduced my app. I didn't have big ads or flashy campaigns. I simply showed up where my potential customers were and offered them something that could actually make their lives easier. Slowly but surely, users began signing up, and word started to spread. But the journey was far from easy. In the first few months, I barely made any money. I remember sitting in my small apartment, refreshing the user stats page every few hours, hoping to see a spike. At times, it felt like I was shouting into the void. Every new user felt like a huge victory, but it was still hard to keep the momentum going when the numbers didn't reflect the effort I was putting in. I had to get creative. I started offering free trials, reaching out to bloggers for reviews, and doing everything I could to increase visibility. Slowly, the feedback began to roll in, and I realized that my app wasn't just helping people organize their tasks, it was helping them find clarity in their lives. That was the breakthrough moment for me. I had built something people genuinely found useful, and the more they used it, the more they liked it. But even when things started to pick up, there were moments of doubt. The technical issues were endless. There were days when the servers would crash, bugs would appear in the most inconvenient times, and customers would leave angry reviews. I had to learn how to handle criticism, deal with the financial strain, and juggle multiple roles within the company, from customer service to marketing to development. I remember crying a few times in frustration, but I always pushed through. By the end of the first year, things had started to stabilize. The app was gaining traction, and users were coming back. I introduced a premium version with extra features, which helped turn a small profit. But I still hadn't achieved what I considered true success. It was only when I hit my second year and secured my first round of investment that everything truly began to change. Getting investment was a game changer. It wasn't just the money, it was the validation. Investors saw potential in what I had built, and that made me believe in myself more than ever before. I expanded my team, hired marketing experts, and started focusing more on improving the app's user experience. I learned that growth wasn't just about getting more users, it was about retaining them and building a community around my product. Fast forward to today, and the business has completely transformed my life. The app has hundreds of thousands of users across the globe, and we've expanded into offering enterprise solutions as well. My team has grown to 20 people, and we're continually improving the app to meet the needs of our diverse user base. We've had challenges along the way, but each one has taught me something valuable about leadership, business, and perseverance. Looking back, I'm so glad I took the leap. The journey was far from easy, and there were times when I thought about quitting, but I didn't. The hardest moments became the stepping stones to success. I'm living proof that if you have a clear vision, work relentlessly, and adapt to the challenges, anything is possible. If you're sitting on the edge of a decision, wondering whether you should take that leap, just remember, every successful entrepreneur started somewhere, just like you. And the only way to know if you'll succeed is to give it a shot. Failure isn't something to fear, it's part of the process. But success? It's worth every sleepless night, every ounce of effort, and every failure along the way. Now, I wake up every day knowing I'm building something that will leave a lasting impact. I'm not just making money. I'm helping people become more productive, more organized, and ultimately more fulfilled. And that's the best part of all. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.